Gypsies mocked a disabled female veteran. 30 minutes later, 8 Marines blocked the parking lot. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The greasy laugh echoed off the chipped paint of the convenience store wall, striking Sarah's ears like a physical blow. Look at her, all crippled up. Bet she got that limping for our freedoms, eh? The man speaking was heavy-set, with a florid face and small, mean eyes. He gestured with a half-eaten hot dog towards Sarah, who was carefully maneuvering her way from her older model sedan towards the entrance, her customized cane a familiar extension of her arm. His companions, a woman with brightly dyed hair and a younger man with a vacant smirk, joined in the crude laughter. Sarah flinched, almost imperceptibly, her hand tightening on the worn grip of her cane. The familiar heat of shame and anger rose in her cheeks, a feeling she had fought against for years, a feeling she thought she had mostly conquered. But some days, the barbs still found their mark. She kept her gaze fixed on the store's entrance, her jaw set, her movements deliberate. She needed to pick up her prescription, a necessity, not a luxury. Their words, sharp and laced with a casual cruelty, followed her like wasps. Probably faking it for the benefits, the woman cackled, her voice shrill. They all do, these so-called heroes. Want a handout for every little scratch. Sarah's breath hitched. Her little scratch was a constellation of shrapnel still embedded too close to her spine, a daily, throbbing reminder of a dusty road in Kandahar, an IED, and the screams of her comrades. It was the reason she walked with a permanent limp, the reason her right leg often felt like it was filled with fire and ice. It was the reason her career as a Marine Corps sergeant, a career she had loved with every fiber of her being, had been cut brutally short. She reached the door, the bell above it tinkling with a false cheerfulness as she entered the relative quiet of the store. But the laughter from outside still seemed to cling to her, a sticky, unwelcome residue. She could feel the eyes of other customers, the uncomfortable pity, the quick glances away. This was her life now, a landscape of small, daily humiliations endured with a dignity she had to consciously rebuild every single morning. But as she stood at the pharmacy counter, waiting, the memory of their sneering faces, their casual dismissal of her sacrifice, burned. And unbeknownst to her, and certainly to her tormentors still loitering in the parking lot, a chain of events was about to be set in motion, a response born from a brotherhood that never forgets its own. Why do some find amusement in the suffering of others? And what happens when a lifetime of service and sacrifice is met not with respect, but with open, public ridicule? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover the incredible story of what happened next, right after this. We're about to witness a moment that will restore your faith in loyalty and honor. But first, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that every veteran, especially those who bear the visible and invisible scars of service, deserves our utmost respect, hit that like button and subscribe because you won't want to miss the powerful conclusion to this story, featuring exclusive insights into the unbreakable bonds of a military family. Sergeant Sarah Matthews, USMC, retired, had once been a force of nature. At 5'7", with a lean, wiry strength and eyes that could flash with an intensity that made recruits tremble, she had been a natural leader. She joined the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a fierce patriotism and a desire to prove herself in a world that often underestimated women. She thrived in the structured discipline, the camaraderie, the unwavering sense of purpose. She served 2 tours in Iraq before her unit was deployed to Afghanistan. It was there, during a routine patrol in Helmand Province, that her life changed forever. Her squad was ambushed, an IED ripping through their Humvee with a deafening roar and a searing flash of light. Sarah remembered the chaos, the screams, the smell of burning fuel, and something else, something metallic and terrifying. She remembered dragging her wounded corporal, young Miller, to cover, his blood warm on her hands, even as shrapnel tore through her own leg and back. She remembered holding pressure on his wounds, shouting encouragement, refusing to let him give up until the medevac chopper finally arrived, its rotors beating a rhythm of desperate hope against the hostile sky. She woke up weeks later in Landstuhl, Germany, her body a landscape of pain, her career over. The doctors saved her leg, but the nerve damage was permanent, the shrapnel too dangerously lodged to remove completely. She was honorably discharged, her uniform carefully folded, her medals, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star with Valor, tucked away in a small wooden box. Returning to civilian life had been a harder battle than any she had faced in combat. The physical pain was a constant companion, but the invisible wounds, the PTSD, the loss of identity, were even more debilitating. She was no longer Sergeant Matthews, leader of Marines. She was Sarah, the disabled veteran, a label that felt both reductive and isolating. She settled in the small, quiet town of Oakhaven, hoping for peace, for a place where she could rebuild her life, piece by painstaking piece. She bought a small, fixer-upper cottage on the outskirts of town, its garden overgrown but promising. She found a part-time job at the local library, the quiet hum of the stacks a soothing contrast to the cacophony of her memories. Her days were a routine of quiet perseverance. Physical therapy, managing her pain medication, tending her small garden, reading. She rarely spoke of her service. Oakhaven was not a military town. Most people here saw her as just that quiet woman with a limp. Some were kind, offering help she usually politely declined. Others, like the group at the convenience store, were a stark reminder that ignorance and cruelty were not confined to war zones. The prescription she needed to pick up was for the nerve pain, a medication that allowed her a few hours of relative relief each day, enough to function, to maintain her independence. Without it, the burning, stabbing sensations in her leg would become unbearable. That was why she had braved the trip to the store. Despite feeling particularly vulnerable that morning, a lingering effect of a night filled with vivid, unwelcome dreams of Afghanistan. Her old sedan, a relic from before her last deployment, was another source of quiet struggle. Getting in and out was an ordeal, her stiff leg refusing to cooperate easily. But she held on to it, a symbol of her self-reliance. She refused to be defined by her disability, refused to succumb to the pity, or, worse, the contempt of others. Each day was a small act of defiance, a testament to the resilience forged in the crucible of the Marine Corps. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. It wasn't just a motto. It was a way of life, a promise she had made to herself, to her fallen comrades, to the core values she still held dear. Faithful to her duty, faithful to her honor, even when the world seemed determined to strip it away. She knew the group outside the store, the ones who had mocked her, were not an isolated incident. She had encountered their like before. People whose own insecurities or bitterness manifested as cruelty towards anyone they perceived as different or weak. She usually ignored them, her training in stoicism serving her well. But today, their words had cut deeper, perhaps because they had targeted her service, the very thing that cost her so much, the very thing she still held as a source of quiet, battered pride. The Marine Corps had taught her many things: discipline, courage, leadership. It had also taught her about the unbreakable bond of brotherhood, the knowledge that Marines always look out for their own. It was a comforting thought, a distant echo from a life that felt a lifetime away. She had no idea how profoundly that echo was about to resonate in the present. As Sarah stood at the pharmacy counter, the pharmacist, Mr. Henderson, a different Henderson from the diner owner in another tale, for kindness and its need are universal, greeted her with his usual quiet warmth. He was an older man, his own son having served a tour in Vietnam, and he always treated Sarah with a gentle respect that she deeply appreciated. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his eyes kind. "Your prescription is ready. How are you feeling today?" Sarah managed a small smile. "Getting by, Mr. Henderson. Same as always." She didn't mention the incident outside. She didn't want to burden him, nor did she want to draw more attention to herself. She paid for her medication, exchanged a few pleasantries about the weather, and prepared to leave. The thought of facing the group outside again filled her with a quiet dread, but she squared her shoulders. She would not let them see her cowed. As she stepped back out into the bright sunlight, the group was still there, now gathered around a flashy, oversized pickup truck, their laughter still loud and obnoxious. They saw her emerge, and the taunts immediately resumed. "Well, look who it is. Took you long enough." "Gimp," the heavy-set man shouted, taking a deliberate step towards her, blocking her path to her car. "Lost your way." Sarah ignored him, attempting to sidestep. But the younger man moved to block her on the other side. They were penning her in, their expressions a mixture of amusement and menace. "What's the hurry, sweetheart?" the woman with the dyed hair sneered. "Don't like our company?" Sarah's heart began to pound. This was escalating. She had dealt with verbal abuse before, but this felt different, more threatening. Her hand instinctively tightened on her cane, not as a weapon, but as a point of stability in a suddenly unstable world. "Please let me pass," she said, her voice low but firm, trying to keep the tremor out of it. "I need to get to my car." "Oh, she needs to get to her car," the heavy-set man mimicked in a high-pitched voice, to the delight of his companions. "What's the matter, hero? Afraid you're going to miss your pity party?" He leaned in closer, his face unpleasantly close to hers, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes and something sour. "You know, I pay taxes. Taxes that probably pay for your fancy benefits, your so-called disability. So, in a way, you work for me. And I say you ain't going nowhere till we're done talking to you." The injustice of his words, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance, was breathtaking. Sarah felt a cold rage begin to build beneath her carefully constructed composure. She thought of her years of service, the friend she had lost, the pain she endured daily, all dismissed so casually, so cruelly. But she knew reacting with anger would only escalate the situation, potentially put her in physical danger. She was disabled, alone, and they were 3-1. She took a deep, steadying breath, her Marine training kicking in, assessed the situation, identify threats, maintain discipline. "I have no quarrel with you," she said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the turmoil within. "I just want to leave." Just then, a beat-up landscaping truck pulled into the parking lot. The driver, a young man in his early 20s wearing a faded Semper Fi t-shirt, was there to pick up supplies from the hardware store next door. He couldn't help but notice the confrontation. 3 aggressive-looking individuals cornering a woman who walked with a noticeable limp. He didn't know Sarah, didn't know the context, but something about the scene, the clear imbalance of power, the woman's quiet dignity in the face of their aggression, set off his internal alarms. He cut the engine and watched, his hand hovering near his phone. He wasn't a hero, just a former Marine Lance Corporal who'd done his 4 years and gotten out. But the Corps had taught him a few things, and one of them was he didn't let bullies torment the vulnerable. "You didn't stand by." The heavy-set man, emboldened by Sarah's lack of overt resistance, reached out and poked her shoulder dismissively. "Not so tough now, are you, soldier girl?" That was the moment. The physical contact, however slight, crossed the line. Sarah's eyes, which had been carefully neutral, flashed with a sudden, cold fire. It was the look of a sergeant of Marines who had faced down far worse than these parking lot thugs. But before she could speak, before the situation could escalate further, something unexpected happened. The young landscaper in the Semper Fi t-shirt, seeing the poke, had seen enough. He quietly dialed a number on his phone, a number he hadn't called in months, but one he knew by heart. The young landscaper, whose name was Kevin, spoke quietly into his phone, his eyes still fixed on the unfolding drama across the parking lot. "Gunny Rourke? It's Kevin Thompson from 2nd Battalion. "Yeah, I'm good, Gunny. Listen, I'm at the Oak Haven Strip Mall by the hardware store. There's a lady here, walks with a cane, looks like she might be a vet, and these 3 lowlifes are seriously harassing her, cornering her. One of them just poked her. Yeah, real aggressive. I don't know, Gunny, it just don't feel right. She's handling herself with dignity, but they're outnumbering her. Can you?" "Okay. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on things." "Thanks, Gunny." He disconnected the call, a small measure of relief easing the tension in his shoulders. Gunnery Sergeant Gunny Rourke was a legend in their old unit, a man who embodied the Marine Corps spirit of loyalty and swift action. If anyone could help, or knew who could, it was Gunny Rourke. Kevin kept his distance, but his presence, his focused attention, seemed to have a slight dampening effect on the aggressors. They glanced over at him, perhaps sensing a potential witness, and their taunts became marginally less overt, though their menacing posture remained. Sarah, unaware of Kevin's intervention, continued to try and de-escalate the situation. "Look," she said, her voice still remarkably steady, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to go about my day. If you'll excuse me." She made another attempt to move towards her car, but the heavy-set man, whom his companions called Chunk, blocked her again, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "Oh, we're not done excusing you yet, hero. We were just getting the good part. Tell us, what kind of hero gets so busted up they can barely walk? Did you trip over your own feet, or did you actually see any action? My guess is you were a paper pusher, got a boo-boo, and now you're milking it for all it's worth." The accusation, so far from the truth, so dismissive of the hell she had endured, of the lives she had fought to save, was like a fresh stab to an old wound. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment, a flicker of pain crossing her face. She saw again the dust, the smoke, the blood. She heard young Corporal Miller's cries. The price of her boo-boo was etched into her soul, into every nerve ending of her damaged leg. When she opened her eyes, the fire was back, but it was a controlled burn, a deep, cold fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice quiet but resonating with an intensity that even Chunk seemed to register. There was something in her eyes now, something that gave him a moment's pause. But the woman with the dyed hair, perhaps sensing his hesitation, egged him on. "Don't let her get to you, Chunk. She's just trying to act tough. These fake veterans are all alike. All talk." Chunk, his bravado restored, puffed out his chest. "Yeah, you're right. All talk. So, tell us, Sergeant," he sneered, noticing for the first time a faint indentation on her collar where her rank insignia might once have been, or perhaps just guessing. "What did you really do to earn that, Limp? Fall off a barstool?" Sarah didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering, holding a weight of experience and sorrow that he couldn't begin to comprehend. She was, in that moment, every inch the Marine sergeant who had faced down death and refused to yield. She was thinking of her men, of the oath she had taken. She was thinking that these people, in their ignorance and cruelty, were spitting on graves they didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, miles away, Gunny Rourke was not a man to sit idle. Kevin Thompson was a good kid, a solid Marine. If Thompson said there was a problem, there was a problem. Rourke made 2 quick calls. The first was to the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department, a brief, no-nonsense report of a public disturbance and harassment in progress, emphasizing the potential vulnerability of one of the individuals involved. He knew the local response might be slow or inadequate, but it was a necessary first step. His second call was to a different kind of network. Within minutes, a discreet message was rippling through a local group of Marine veterans, active and retired, who lived within a 30-mile radius of Oak Haven. The message was simple. Brother Marine in Oak Haven, possible code, 1 situation, strip mall by hardware store. Female vet, disabled, being harassed by 3 hostiles. Stand by for updates or request for presence if local PD unresponsive. Code 1 wasn't an official military designation, but in their informal network, it meant one of their own was in trouble and needed immediate support. It was a call to rally, a summons to the colors, even if those colors were now civilian clothes. Back in the parking lot, Sarah decided she had endured enough. She was not going to engage further, not going to give them the satisfaction of a reaction they could twist or escalate. She took a deep breath and, with as much dignity as she could muster, she said, "I am leaving now." She turned, intending to walk around the pickup truck and towards her car, even if it meant taking the longer, more exposed route. Chunk laughed. "Oh no, you don't. We're not done with you." He reached out to grab her arm. Chunk's meaty hand closed around Sarah's upper arm, his grip surprisingly strong. The sudden, unwelcome physical contact sent a jolt of adrenaline through her, overriding her carefully maintained composure. Instinct, honed by years of combat training, took over. She didn't pull away. Instead, she pivoted sharply on her good leg, using her cane not as a support, but as a lever, hooking it behind Chunk's ankle while simultaneously driving her free elbow hard into his exposed ribs. The maneuver was swift, economical, and brutally effective. Chunk let out a surprised grunt of pain, his grip loosening as he stumbled backwards, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not of this caliber, from a crippled woman. The woman with the dyed hair shrieked, and the younger man, who had been smirking, took an involuntary step back, his amusement vanishing. Sarah didn't press the attack. She used the moment of surprise to create distance, stepping back, her cane now held defensively, her eyes blazing with a cold, dangerous light. "Do not," she said, her voice low and vibrating with controlled fury. "Touch me again." For a split second, there was a stunned silence. Chunk, clutching his ribs, stared at her with a new, unwelcome respect. He had underestimated her badly. This wasn't some helpless victim. This was a fighter. But his humiliation quickly turned to rage. "Why you crazy?" he sputtered, advancing again, his face contorted. "I'll teach you to assault me." Kevin Thompson, across the parking lot, saw the situation escalate. He was already out of his truck, phone in hand, ready to call 911 if things got physical, but now he started moving forward, shouting, "Hey, leave her alone. I saw what you did. You grabbed her first." His intervention, though he was outnumbered, gave Chunk another moment's pause. Fighting one disabled woman was one thing. Dealing with an angry witness, potentially drawing more attention, was another. The woman with the dyed hair, however, seemed incensed by Sarah's defiance. "Get her, Chunk," she shrieked. "Don't let that cripple disrespect you." But before Chunk could decide on his next move, before Kevin could reach them, the dynamic of the entire parking lot shifted dramatically, irrevocably. Around the corner of the strip mall, moving with a quiet, purposeful speed that was somehow more intimidating than any shouted threat, came a group of men. There were 8 of them. They weren't in uniform, dressed in casual civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, work boots. But there was no mistaking their bearing. Ramrod-straight postures, eyes that missed nothing, an air of coiled, disciplined power that radiated from them like a physical force. They moved as a unit, fanning out slightly as they approached, their focus entirely on Sarah and her 3 tormentors. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They simply arrived. And their arrival changed everything. The lead figure, a tall, powerfully built man with a shaved head and an unyielding gaze, was Gunny Rourke. He had evidently been closer than Kevin realized. The other 7 were a mix of ages, some clearly veterans of recent conflicts, others older, their service perhaps dating back further, but all sharing that same unmistakable aura of Marine discipline. Chunk and his companions froze. Their earlier bravado, their sneering contempt, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a sudden, stark fear. They were no longer 3-on-1 against a lone woman. They were now facing 8 men who looked like they could dismantle them without breaking a sweat. And these men were not smiling. Gunny Rourke came to a halt a few feet from Sarah, his eyes briefly meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before he turned his attention to Chunk. "Having a problem here, gentlemen?" Rourke asked, his voice calm, almost conversational, yet laced with an unmistakable undertone of steel. Chunk swallowed hard, his earlier belligerence gone. "And no problem, officer. We were just talking." "Officer?" Rourke raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe I introduced myself as an officer of the law, though I'm a strong proponent of it. What we are," he gestured to his companions, "is concerned citizens. And it looked to us like you were doing a bit more than just talking to this lady." He took a step closer to Chunk, whose eyes darted nervously from Rourke to the other silent, imposing figures. In fact, Rourke continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more menacing in its quiet intensity. It looked a hell of a lot like harassment, an assault, against a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He let that sink in. The words Marine Corps seemed to hang in the air, heavy and significant. Chunk's face, which had been flushed with anger, now turned a pasty white. He finally understood. This wasn't just a random group of men. This was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. The silence that followed Gunny Rourke's words was thick with unspoken menace. Chunk and his two companions looked like trapped animals, their eyes darting between the 8 formidable figures who now effectively surrounded them and their garish pickup truck. The woman with the dyed hair had lost all her earlier shrillness. She was now clutching the arm of the younger man, who seemed to be trying to make himself as small as possible. Kevin Thompson, the young landscaper, had reached the edge of the scene, wisely choosing to observe from slight distance, a look of profound relief and awe on his face. Sarah herself stood quietly, her adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a mixture of astonishment and a deep, bone-weary gratitude. She hadn't asked for this intervention, hadn't expected it, but its silent, powerful affirmation of her worth, of her service, was a balm to her wounded spirit. Gunny Rourke's gaze remained fixed on Chunk. "This lady," Rourke said, his voice still quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command, "served her country with honor. She sacrificed for it. She bears the scars of that sacrifice. And you," his eyes narrowed, "you and your friends thought it was appropriate to mock her, to threaten her, to lay your hands on her." Chunk stammered, "We didn't know she was a Marine." Rourke's expression didn't soften. "And that would make it all right? You think it's acceptable to harass any disabled person? Any woman on her own? Let me be very clear. Your ignorance is not an excuse. Your behavior is beneath contempt. But the fact that your victim is a fellow Marine." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear and chilling. "That makes this personal for us." He took another deliberate step forward, and Chunk instinctively recoiled, bumping into his own truck. "We uphold a certain code," Rourke continued, his voice like chips of ice. "We honor our own. We protect our own. And we do not tolerate disrespect towards those who have worn the uniform, especially those who have bled for it." He then turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the parking lot, which had become strangely silent. Other shoppers, sensing the gravity of the unfolding drama, had stopped to watch from a distance. "It seems," Rourke said, his voice now carrying to the onlookers, "that the parking situation here has become a little congested." He then looked back at Chunk and his companions. "You three seem to be having trouble with your vehicle. Perhaps it would be best if you didn't attempt to drive it right now. In fact, I strongly suggest you don't go anywhere until the sheriff arrives. I believe he's on his way. We wouldn't want you to miss him." It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. 2 of Rourke's companions, burly men with arms like oak branches, moved almost casually to stand directly in front of Chunk's pickup truck, effectively blocking its exit. Another 2 positioned themselves behind it. They didn't touch the truck, didn't make any overt threats. They simply stood there, an immovable human barricade. Chunk looked wildly from the men blocking his truck to Rourke, his face a mask of dawning horror. He was trapped. His earlier arrogance, his belief in his own thuggish dominance, was useless against this silent, disciplined show of force. He had picked on the wrong person, and in doing so, had inadvertently summoned a quiet storm of Marine Corps loyalty. The woman with the dyed hair began to whimper. The younger man looked like he was about to be sick. Rourke ignored them, turning his attention to Sarah. His entire demeanor softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing, replaced by a look of profound respect and concern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now gentle, "Sergeant Matthews, are you all right? Are you injured?" Sarah, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her fortunes, could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. I'm okay, Gunny," she managed, instinctively using the familiar address, though she didn't personally know him. "Thank you. Thank you all." "No thanks necessary, Sergeant," Rourke said. "We're just colleagues, looking out for each other. It's what we do." He then noticed Kevin Thompson hovering nearby. "And thank you, Thompson," Rourke said, acknowledging the young landscaper with a nod. "You did good, Marine. You made the right call." Kevin flushed with pride. "Just doing what anyone should have done, Gunny." The distant wail of a siren could now be heard, growing closer. Sheriff Brody, no doubt, responding to Rourke's earlier call. The stage was set for the final act of this impromptu drama, an act that would not involve violence or vengeance, but a quiet, powerful lesson in respect, honor, and the unbreakable bonds of the Marine Corps. The arrival of Sheriff Brody's cruiser added another layer to the already charged atmosphere in the convenience store parking lot. Brody, a portly man nearing retirement, took in the scene with a practiced, weary eye. The three visibly terrified individuals by the pickup truck, the 8 calm but imposing men who clearly had them contained, the shaken woman with the cane, and the small crowd of onlookers. He knew Gunny Rourke by reputation, a straight shooter, a respected figure in the local veteran community, not a man prone to exaggeration or unnecessary confrontations. "Rourke," Sheriff Brody said, approaching cautiously. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here? Got a call about a disturbance." Gunny Rourke met the sheriff's gaze evenly. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Just a little citizen's intervention. Seems these three," he gestured towards Chunk and his companions, "were engaged in some rather enthusiastic harassment and assault of this lady here, Sergeant Sarah Matthews, a decorated Marine veteran." Chunk started to protest. "We didn't assault anyone. She attacked me," but a cold look from Rourke silenced him. Sergeant Matthews was defending herself after being physically accosted and verbally abused by these individuals, Rourke stated, his voice firm. "There are witnesses, including young Mr. Thompson here," he indicated Kevin, who nodded vigorously. "And I believe the store's security cameras might also have a clear view of the initial provocation." Sheriff Brody sighed, running a hand over his balding head. He knew this was going to be a mountain of paperwork. He looked at Sarah, his expression softening with a hint of sympathy. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you wish to press charges?" Sarah, who had regained much of her composure, took a deep breath. She looked at Chunk, at the woman, at the younger man, seeing not just their earlier cruelty, but now their pathetic fear. Vengeance wasn't her way, but accountability, that was different. "Sheriff," she said, her voice clear and steady, "these individuals subjected me to unprovoked verbal abuse, mocked my disability, which I received in service to this country. And yes, one of them," she indicated Chunk, "did physically grab my arm. I defended myself. I leave it to your judgment as to what charges are appropriate, but I do believe their conduct warrants official attention." "I see," Sheriff Brody said, making notes. He then turned to Chunk and his companions. "All right, you three. I'm going to need your IDs and a statement, and I suggest you cooperate fully. Lying to a law enforcement officer is a serious offense, especially when there are 8 Marines and a security camera watching you do it." The mention of 8 Marines again visibly rattled the trio. They fumbled for their wallets, their earlier belligerence completely gone. As Sheriff Brody began the tedious process of taking statements and running IDs, Gunny Rourke and his men remained quietly present, a silent but powerful assurance that the situation would be handled properly. They didn't interfere with the sheriff's work, but their watchful presence ensured that Chunk and his companions couldn't try to downplay or misrepresent what had occurred. Sarah watched them, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. These men, most of whom she didn't know, had come. They had stood for her, for the uniform she once wore, for the sacrifices she had made. They hadn't asked for explanations or justifications. They had simply seen a fellow Marine in distress and responded swiftly and decisively. It was the embodiment of Semper Fidelis. After Sheriff Brody had gathered the initial information and strongly advised Chunk and his companions to leave Oakhaven and not return, an advisement they seemed more than eager to comply with once they were finally allowed to access their truck under the watchful eyes of the Marines, he approached Sarah again. "Sergeant Matthews," he said, his tone now one of deep respect, "I am truly sorry you had to endure that. There's no place for that kind of behavior in our town. We'll file a report, and if you decide to pursue further charges, my office will support you fully." "Thank you, Sheriff," Sarah said. "I appreciate that." As Chunk's pickup truck, now unblocked, hastily sped out of the parking lot, Gunny Rourke turned to Sarah. "Sergeant, it was an honor to meet you. Are you sure you're all right? Do you need anything? A ride home, perhaps?" Sarah managed a genuine smile, the first one that had reached her eyes all day. "I'm all right, Gunny. Truly, you and your men, you have no idea what this means to me. We have some idea, Sergeant. One of the other Marines, an older man with kind eyes, said quietly. We've all been there, in one way or another. Nobody messes with our family. The simple statement, our family, resonated deeply with Sarah. For years, she had felt adrift, disconnected from the tribe that had once been her entire world. Today, that tribe had found her again. The departure of Chunk and his ignominious crew left a strange sort of calm in the convenience store parking lot. The small crowd of onlookers began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others murmuring their admiration for the quiet, effective intervention they had witnessed. Sheriff Brody, having completed his initial report, tipped his hat to Sarah and Gunny Rourke before heading back to his cruiser, a new respect for the local veteran community etched on his face. Sarah turned to face the 8 men who had appeared, as if from nowhere, to stand in her defense. I don't even know all your names, she said, a slight tremor still in her voice. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. But thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Gunny Rourke introduced his companions, a mix of active duty and retired Marines, men who worked as local contractors, teachers, small business owners, ordinary citizens who shared an extraordinary bond. Each man shook Sarah's hand, their grips firm, their eyes conveying a deep, unspoken understanding. You ever need anything, Sergeant? One of them, a younger man with a 1st Marine Division tattoo visible on his forearm, said earnestly, anything at all. You just call Gunny Rourke. He knows how to reach us. We'll look out for our own. Our own, Sarah repeated softly, the words a balm to wounds deeper than any shrapnel could inflict. For so long, she had felt like an outsider, her identity as a Marine a thing of the past, a uniform packed away. But today, these men had reminded her that once a Marine, always a Marine. The eagle, globe, and anchor were not just symbols. They were a covenant. Kevin Thompson, the young landscaper who had made the initial call, approached hesitantly. Sergeant Matthews, he said, I'm glad you're okay. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. Sarah extended her hand to him. Kevin, right? Thank you. You showed true courage today. You did what a Marine does. Kevin beamed, his chest swelling with pride at her words. Gunny Rourke clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, son. Real good. You remembered your training. As the group began to disperse, Rourke lingered for a moment with Sarah. Are you sure you're all right to drive, Sergeant? He asked, his earlier sternness completely gone, replaced by a fatherly concern. I'm fine, Gunny, Sarah assured him. A little shaken, but fine. You know, for a while there, I'd almost forgotten what this felt like. What it feels like, Sergeant? Rourke asked gently. Belonging, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Knowing that someone has your 6, no questions asked. Rourke nodded, his eyes understanding. That's something we never forget, Sergeant, and we never let our brothers and sisters forget it either. You take care of yourself. And remember, you're not alone out here. With a final, respectful nod, Gunny Rourke turned and left, his men falling in quietly behind him, disappearing as quickly and efficiently as they had arrived. Sarah watched them go, a profound sense of peace settling over her, a peace she hadn't felt in years. The encounter with Chunk and his friends had been ugly, demeaning. But the response it had triggered, the swift, unwavering support from men she didn't even know, had transformed a moment of humiliation into a powerful affirmation of her worth, her service, and the enduring strength of the Marine Corps family. She got in her old sedan, her hands still trembling slightly, but her spirit soaring. As she drove away from the convenience store, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The parking lot looked ordinary again, just another unremarkable strip mall on an unremarkable day. But for Sarah, and for everyone who had witnessed what happened there, it would forever be a place where honor was defended, where loyalty was demonstrated, and where the quiet courage of one disabled female veteran was met with the thundering, silent support of her brothers in arms. The prescription in her bag suddenly seemed less important than the medicine her soul had just received. The story of what happened in the Oak Haven convenience store parking lot didn't make the local news, not in any official capacity. Sheriff Brody filed his report, Chunk and his companions were likely nursing their bruised egos and newfound fear of Marine veterans, and life in the small town largely resumed its normal rhythm. But ripples spread, as they always do. Kevin Thompson, the young landscaper, told his family and friends, his voice filled with pride at the small role he had played. The other shoppers who had witnessed the event recounted it with varying degrees of accuracy and embellishment, but the core message remained: don't mess with a Marine, especially one who has friends like Gunny Rourke. For Sarah Matthews, the impact was profound and lasting. The incident, as ugly as it had been, had inadvertently reconnected her with a vital part of herself, a part she thought had been lost on that dusty road in Afghanistan. The feeling of isolation, of being a forgotten relic, began to recede, replaced by a renewed sense of belonging and purpose. She started attending local veteran meetings, initially hesitant, but soon finding a welcoming community of men and women who understood her experiences, who shared her values. Gunny Rourke became a regular presence in her life, a gruff but kind mentor and friend. He introduced her to other female veterans in the area, women who had faced their own unique challenges both in service and in transitioning back to civilian life. They formed a small, informal support group, sharing stories, offering encouragement, and reminding each other of their inherent strength and worth. Sarah even started volunteering at a local equine therapy center that worked with disabled veterans and at-risk youth. Her patience, her quiet strength, and her innate understanding of trauma made her a natural. Working with the horses and with people who were also navigating their own difficult paths proved to be deeply healing for her. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, and the physical pain was still a daily reality, but they no longer held the same suffocating power over her. She had found a new mission, a new way to serve, not with a rifle, but with compassion and understanding. The small wooden box containing her medals came off the dusty shelf in her closet. She didn't wear them, but she placed them on her dresser, where she could see them every day, no longer as symbols of what she had lost, but as reminders of what she had endured, what she had stood for, and the unbreakable spirit that defined her. Her garden flourished under her care, the roses blooming with a vibrancy that mirrored her own slowly reawakening spirit. She still walked with a limp, her cane a constant companion, but now she carried herself with a renewed confidence, her head held a little higher, her eyes a little brighter. She was Sergeant Sarah Matthews, USMC, retired. A warrior, a survivor, a woman who, when faced with cruelty and disrespect, had stood her ground, and in doing so, had rediscovered the profound and enduring power of the family she had never truly left. The bonds of the Marine Corps, she learned, were not severed by injury or discharge. They were forged in shared sacrifice, tempered in the fires of adversity, and they endured a silent, unwavering promise, semper fidelis, always faithful, not just a motto, but a sacred trust, a lifeline for those who had served, ensuring that no Marine ever truly stand alone. It is a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not performed on distant battlefields, but in the quiet, everyday struggles for dignity and respect. And that true strength is not measured by the absence of wounds, but by the courage to keep fighting, to keep living, to keep believing in the good, even when the world shows you its ugliest side. And if you ever doubt the power of loyalty or the reach of a brotherhood forged in shared sacrifice, remember the day 8 Marines blocked a parking lot for one of their own. Because some families don't share blood, they share an oath. And that oath, for a Marine, is for life. The legacy of that day in the Oak Haven parking lot continued to unfold in quiet but meaningful ways. Gunny Rourke, inspired by Sarah's quiet strength and the swift response of his network, formalized their local veterans support group. They began organizing regular check-ins on older or more isolated veterans in the county, offering practical help with home repairs, rides to medical appointments, or simply companionship. They also started a small mentorship program, pairing newly returned veterans with those who had more experience navigating the often bewildering transition to civilian life. Sarah became an integral part of this initiative, her firsthand understanding of the challenges faced by disabled female veterans proving invaluable. She found a new voice, sharing her story, not the details of combat, but the struggles of recovery, the search for identity, the importance of community at local schools and community gatherings. Her quiet eloquence and unshakable dignity had a profound impact on many. The convenience store where the incident occurred, perhaps shamed by the negative attention or perhaps genuinely moved, installed a new, clearly marked veteran parking-only spot right by the front door, a small but visible gesture of respect. Mr. Henderson, the pharmacist, made it a point to always ask Sarah about her volunteer work, his admiration for her evident. Even Sheriff Brody seemed to have a renewed appreciation for the veterans in his community, occasionally dropping by their meetings to offer his support or just to chat. As for Chunk and his companions, they were never seen in Oakhaven again. Word of their humiliation at the hands of a bunch of old soldiers, as the story was sometimes inaccurately but colorfully retold, had apparently spread through whatever circles they frequented, a cautionary tale about the folly of underestimating quiet strength and the long reach of military brotherhood. Sarah often thought about the sequence of events. If Kevin Thompson hadn't been there, hadn't made that call, if Gunny Rourke hadn't responded so decisively, if those 7 other men hadn't dropped everything to come to the aid of a Marine they'd never met. It was a chain of ifs, a testament to the fact that individual choices, individual acts of courage and loyalty can ripple outwards with unforeseen power. Her life was still not easy. The physical pain remained a stubborn, unwelcome tenant. The memories of war still visited her in the quiet hours of the night. But something fundamental had shifted. She no longer felt like a forgotten casualty, an isolated survivor. She was part of a family, a vast, interconnected network of individuals bound by a shared oath, a shared history, a shared understanding of sacrifice. She was a Marine, and Marines, she now knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, never truly leave a brother or sister behind. Her garden became a riot of color, her roses a testament to resilience, to beauty coaxed from scarred earth. She adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix with a slight limp of his own, and they became inseparable companions on her slow, steady walks. She found joy in small things. The warmth of the sun on her face, the taste of a perfectly ripe tomato from her garden, the quiet camaraderie of shared cup-off coffee with a fellow veteran, the unconditional love of her canine friend. The Medal of Honor is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Sarah Matthews didn't have a Medal of Honor, but in her own quiet way, in her daily battle for dignity, for purpose, for healing, she embodied its spirit. She was a testament to the enduring strength of the human will, to the power of compassion, and to the unbreakable bonds that are forged when individuals stand together for something greater than themselves. Her story, and the story of the 8 Marines who answered her unspoken call, became a quiet legend in Oakhaven, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or even uniforms. Sometimes they wear faded flannel shirts and walk with a cane. And sometimes their greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the everyday courage to live with honor, to treat others with respect, and to never, ever give up on the promise of a better day. If you believe in the power of solidarity and the importance of honoring those who have sacrificed for us, share this story. Let it serve as a reminder that true strength is often found in quiet courage and unwavering loyalty. And may we all strive to be the kind of person who would answer the call for a brother or sister in need, no questions asked. Subscribe to QH for more incredible stories of everyday heroes and the unbreakable bonds that unite us.